I am going to start off the presentation today with Microsoft Azure SQL Premium, and I'll go over a little bit about what it is, and then for the second half of the presentation, Bill will wrap it up with our Power BI presentation. So to start out, a little bit about Tallan is a project-based application development consulting firm founded in 1985, so we've been around for almost 30 years, delivering projects to just about 600 clients. We are made up of about 120 technical consultants, and we do work ranging from strategy, architecture, integration with everything from the Microsoft stack with Microsoft BizTalk, SQL Server, Power BI, Microsoft Azure. We also have a user experience team that will help out with all of our front-end development and making sure that all of our applications that we write and for people have the best user experience possible. We are a Microsoft National Solutions Provider. We're one of about 35 in the United States. And on our staff, we have some MVP authors, some Microsoft Virtual Technical Specialists, and we have 5 gold certifications with Microsoft in application development, collaboration and content, which is mostly SharePoint, application integration, business intelligence, and ALM. And we have a national presence where Hartford, Connecticut is our headquarters. We also have offices in Boston, Santa Ana, Tampa, New York, and Washington, D.C. So with that, I'm going to start off today by explaining what as a service means. Is a lot of people, whenever we talk about Azure, we talk about the cloud, you always hear as a service. And there's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And infrastructure as a service is just kind of what you would expect it to be. It's infrastructure that's hosted inside of an environment. It runs much like Hyper-V in your own environment today. Then the next thing, the jump is to platform as a service. Platform as a service is where you have kind of a boxed type, what I like to call a box type application, where you're responsible for the application and the data, and everything else is handled for you, meaning that the networking, the infrastructure, the virtual machine that's running on, you don't have to worry about all of that. That's held by, in this case, by Microsoft, and they maintain and support all of that. And then the last piece is software as a service. And software as a service is something like Microsoft Office 365, where you just log in and it just works. You just log in and you use it. You consume what's out there. And I was listening to a presentation a couple weeks ago, and there was a very good implementation of as a service as it pertains to pizza. And this is one that goes out very well to our non-technical folks. So if you were to think of traditional on-premise stuff today and you equate it to pizza and you made it at home, you would have to have a dining room table, soda, electric gas, oven, fire, pizza dough, everything for the cheese to make the pizza. You're in charge of it all, and if you don't have any of those, then you're not going to be able to have your pizza. So if the next tier up would be the infrastructure as a service, whereas, and this equates to a take and bake pizza, that you would go somewhere and they will have the pizza dough, the tomato sauce, the toppings, and the cheese, and you take it home to bake it, to have it for dinner. The next one would be platform as a service, and this would be the equivalent of having pizza delivered. Is somebody makes the pizza for you and brings it to you, all you have to do is take it into your house and eat it. And then the last part of it is that if you had software as a service, this equates to dining out for pizza, where you go somewhere, you order pizza, it's given to you, and all you have to do is eat it. So, as I said, in here, all of the blue is managed by you. So if you did traditional made at home, you have to have all of the cheese all the way through the dining room table. And then as you get into less and less managed by yourself, it makes it a little bit easier for you to have pizza and move on your merry way. So that's a lot of the analogies of as a service. And what I'm going to start to talk about today is SQL Premium, Microsoft Azure SQL Premium, which you can equate to database platform as a service. Is when you are running SQL Premium or Azure SQL at all, you don't have to worry about all of the virtual machines or anything that's running behind it. You're just worried about the database and the data that's in it. And this is very appealing to some people that are doing different things. And a lot of people will ask me, should I take, or I see Azure SQL and it doesn't do everything that my on-premise SQL server does. How do you expect me to move my accounting system database to Azure SQL? And my response to that most of the time, and almost all the time, is I don't expect you to do it. Azure SQL works well in many cases, and there's some cases that it just doesn't work well, or it's not going to work for your type of implementation. But if you do have other sorts of implementations, such as like proof of concepts, or somewhere where you might need to spin up a database really quick that you don't have capacity on your servers, it's a very good way to spin something up, do proof of concepts. A lot of people are doing them now. If you have a large marketing campaign going out, you can spin up a database really quick, use it. When the marketing campaign is done, you get rid of it. One of the good things about SQL Azure is that you only pay for what you use. So you don't have that leftover hardware sitting there, and you don't have the leftover licenses for a SQL Server that are just sitting there taking up space or using up resources that otherwise wouldn't be used if you were all done. So the first thing that I want to bring up here is the levels of service for Azure SQL. When Azure SQL was first released, Microsoft guaranteed a 99.95% uptime. And the one problem with that was they didn't guarantee any performance returns. So there was some time when Azure SQL first came out, there were queries that you could run and it would take 1 second. You would run it again, it would take 5 seconds. You'd run it again, it would take 20 seconds. Then you run it again, it takes 1 second. So they guaranteed the uptime, but they didn't guarantee any performance on it. And that was one thing that was a real downer for anybody that was using it, because they could never predict the performance of their application. So that was the beginning when they had web in business tiers, and those right now are retired. And if anybody is using those, you can still use them, but going forward, they're pretty much phased out, and you'll be moving all of your stuff that is on the web and business tiers to either the basic, the standard, or the premium tier. And the lowest is the basic tier, which it provides good performance, predictability for a database hour over hour. Some of the things that do well on this are smaller e-commerce sites that might be running that don't have a whole lot of transactions on them, or just like proof of concept type of things. It works fantastic for you. You can spin up a database, you can use it, and it's pretty predictable. The next one is standard, which is obviously a little bit better than the basic, and it will work well with multiple concurrent requests. A lot of people are using these now for web applications that are not super high transactional, but they're pretty well used for types of applications that users would be on using it 8 to 5, and there's not a lot of batch processing going across them. And now they came with SQL Azure Premium, and Premium is the end-all be-all of their performance, and they set it up into tiers of P1, P2, and P3. And the way that they do the performance on those is P1 would be X performance, P2 is 4 times the P1, and P3 is 8 times P1. So these ones are using, the applications that are using these are the higher transaction applications. We have one client that is using it to pull oil and gas wells. It pulls about 35,000 oil and gas wells continuously, taking readings from the devices that are on the gas wells, getting back the data about what's happening at each of those oil and gas wells. So before SQL Premium came out, we were using Azure SQL to do the same thing, and the performance and predictability of it was terrible. But since they've released Azure SQL Premium with different service tiers, they've been able to guarantee that you have certain database throughput units, and I'll get into that in one moment. So the service level defined is something called a database throughput unit. And the database throughput unit is really a representation of the CPU, the memory, and the read-write rates of the machine that it's running on. In BASIC, we'll provide you one database throughput unit. Standard has two different tiers that are S1 and S2 that will offer you 5 or 25. And then the premium does 100, 200, and 800. So database transaction units in a language that you understand, everybody really wants to see what kind of transactions per minute it will perform. And on BASIC, it will perform about 3,500 an hour. Standard, it will do 28 to 1,500 a minute. And then on Premium, it'll do up to 730 transactions a second. And I put on here, this may not be 100% accurate for all applications, but this is just some benchmarking that Microsoft has done across the different tiers that they supply. Whereas I said before, you get a lot of predictability and uniformity through these, where before you could run the same query 5 times in a row and have it range from anywhere from 2 seconds to 15 seconds, and you would be looking at the explain plan on the query, and it came out the same every time, and you could never figure out why it was happening. And this is one thing that in cloud computing they kind of attribute to a noisy neighbor, that a lot of people, when they first started to use Azure SQL, is they were taking benchmarks of the absolute best times of queries running. And what they were doing is, looking at, hey, at 2 o'clock in the morning, my machine is processing, 30 transactions a second. But at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's only processing 4 or 5, because the way that they used to do it was, say if you were sharing a database with multiple tenants on the same machine, you each have, if there's 3 people, you each have 30% of the processing power. If the first 2 people on your tenant all go home at 5 o'clock, it'll start to allocate some of that processing to the third. And so you might be getting 80 and 90% processing power because the other 2 things on your tenant aren't doing anything. But once they come online and start processing again, then you get cut back down to your 30%. So a lot of people were taking benchmarks of their absolute best performance, which wasn't really the real performance time. So a lot of people say, what are the limitations of SQL Azure? And one of the things that it has is that it doesn't support Windows login, that everything has to be through SQL Server authentication. It must always run SSL, and the database service is only available through port 1433. So as people start to see different ways that they have their internal things set up, these are some of the things that you need to start to account for as you think about using SQL Premium and go into SQL Azure in general. These are some limitations / architectural constraints that would be on all of the SQL tiers. Some of the other things that it doesn't do are that it doesn't support SQL jobs or SQL agents. one of the things that a lot of people run into is that it does not support distributed transactions. So if any of these things are requirements of your database, then you're going to have to run this in-house or in infrastructure as a service. And the last thing that is not really a limitation, but more of a performance enhancement to make sure that you don't clobber your neighbor is all of the SQL Azure databases have to have clustered indexes on them when you create them, or it'll let you create them, but it won't let you use them if there's no clustered index on them. So some of the benefits of it, one of the big benefits that I see of SQL Azure is that you really don't have to maintain a SQL server anymore. I can't tell you how many times that we've been working doing a proof of concept or doing a test or just doing something where all of a sudden all of your log files run up, you run out of disk space. That really doesn't happen with SQL Azure anymore. All of that stuff is controlled for you. It's not like you have a limited amount of disk space to use. One of the other things is that you can make your databases geo-redundant so that if it goes down, you have copies of your data in multiple data centers, so that if you were able to, if your database went down, you could pull it up in another region with the geo-redundancy. One of the newer things that they have in it is the point-in-time restore, is that you can bring it back up just as you would with any other database on-premise, that you couldn't do that before. And one of the great things about it is that you can easily move between tiers with an alter statement or with the portal. If you realize that one of our clients is a real-life example, is they have, every so often, they have a ad that will go out on Good Morning America and say, for at this time, you'll have a 20% off coupon with this code. And you can imagine that when something goes on TV on Good Morning America, your e-commerce site would get absolutely crushed. So when they do know that they have those ads going out, or a marketing blast that's gonna hit thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, even millions of people, we can easily bump up the tier of SQL Azure to be able to have the highest premium tier and run that for the weekend. And then when everything calms back down on Monday, put it back to the tier that it was at before. And that kind of all happens to you behind the scenes, is it'll spin it up on a different machine, get everything to where it needs to be, then switch it over to that newer, bigger machine. It will run. As soon as it's done, as soon as you're done with that size tier, you can alter it and put it back down to a smaller tier, and you only pay for what you use. And where normally that would, if you had to do that on your own infrastructure, that would be costly, and a lot of people just really flat out can't do it because they don't have the hardware or the wherewithal to be able to move a database for just a weekend and then have it come back down. And as I said, it's pay for only what you use. And one of the things that's great about that is that if you do have something like that, you may increase your sales over the weekend they've increased their sales by 125% over a weekend, and it is a much more expensive for the premium tier, but it was well worth it in the long run because they didn't have to buy a bigger, beefier server to be able to run that just for a weekend. And some of the things that you can do with it is you can connect to SQL Azure with any of the tools that you normally would. You can connect with Visual Studio, you can connect with SQL Server Management Studio, you can connect with a web interface. So now I'm just going to jump into a quick demo of how you can use SQL Azure Premium. So inside of the Azure portal, we have SQL databases, and this SQL Premium Demo database is the one that I've created for this demo. And right now I have this just running in the Southeast Asia data center. The dashboard here will show a little bit performance of the database. You can see as things are going, you can see what it's doing. And the one thing that I want to show you is that right now I have a project in Visual Studio that's just a little application that is a registration for a school. So I also have the database project in here. So right now I have my Visual Studio connected to the database in SQL Azure, and you can run queries against the SQL Azure database just as you would any other database. Through Visual Studio, I have this one connected through SQL Server Management Studio. We can run the same queries. And this is all connecting to SQL Server in Microsoft Azure. And then the last thing that I'm going to show is the application that we have. And this is connected. This is just a small application that we have running in Microsoft Azure. And all of the different functions inside of it are all running backed up by the SQL Azure database. And I just went and created a new user. We can go back into here and see that it was created up on the database that's running inside of SQL Azure. One of the things that is inside of this application is it's a simple web application, and one of the things that's great for quick sort of proof of concept demos or for doing a new web application is it's all one-click deploy with Microsoft Azure. I have the web application here that we can right-click and publish, and it will publish the web application as well as the database that's attached to this web application. And everything is done with a one-click deploy. So like I said, it's great for doing if you have some sort of small application that you want to use to get your feet wet with Azure and with SQL Azure. It's a great tool that you can get something up and running pretty quickly and at the click of a fingertip using all of the tools that you usually do use. So now that I'm done this, I am going to turn it over to Bill to finish up with the Power BI demo.
Thanks, Dan. Hello, everybody. So Dan talked to you a little bit about Azure SQL. I'll talk to you about Power BI and make a little connection between the two. What is Power BI? Power BI, is the latest from Microsoft. It's an ever-growing suite. Definitely in the last few months, there's been all kinds of movement, and it seems to be continuing and momentum towards building this suite of tools, both desktop, online, in the cloud, that empower users to perform their own analytics. I sort of liken the Microsoft BI stack to a hibernating bear. For years, it was just kind of laying there, and people were using it, kind of proving that, yes, I can do large data warehouses and do a lot of business intelligence with the Microsoft stack, sort of proving themselves against all the other big guys. But then it sort of just was sleeping. And suddenly in the last year or two, this idea of Power BI has come up, and it's definitely awoken the hibernating bear. As you'll see, there's a whole set of tools out there that, are very powerful. And again, you still need maybe that underlying data warehouse, but with these Power BI tools, the power is in the user's hands. You still have, the same security, same level of performance, but the user is now able to do their own analytics and answer their own questions with much less interaction with your IT guys. All right, so the Power BI suite, again, as it stands today, as far as I know, there could be something new already about to be announced. But as of right now, here is your set of tools. So in Excel, 2010 plus, and actually a little bit with 2007 as well, but Your 2010 plus, you've got your power tools, your Power Pivot, Power View, Power Query, Power Map. We'll talk about those a little bit in a minute. In the cloud, Power BI on Office 365, and there's a preview out there for something called Power BI Dashboards, which we'll take a look at. On the desktop, there's also a preview of the Power BI Designer, which basically allows you to do some of the same things you can do in Excel, but without needing Excel. On your tablet and phone, there's an iPhone, iPad, and a Windows app. We'll talk through these as we go. All right, so we'll start with Excel. Power Pivot, Power View, Power Query, Power Map. Really what these are means to connect to your data, right? Do analytics and display it in all different ways. So I'm going to click over here to my Excel Power View that I have created ahead of time. We have a small database of, I'll call it the Tallan law. So we've created a law office that you'll see has a very good average rate, over $400. But we have some billing data and some client and office data within our database. And actually the database that I have this connected to is a Azure SQL Premium database. Mine happens to be in East US. So I've connected my Excel spreadsheet to my SQL Premium database, and I pulled down a set of tables to pull into my Power View. I can do this within what's called the data model. We'll bring this up. So this is my mechanism for looking and pulling and kind of modifying and transforming all of my underlying data. So I've made my connection to the database. I've pulled down these various tables, and I've actually added here, as you'll see by the formula, a column. So this revenue column is not something that was readily available in my data, but I wanted to be able to use it. As a user, I was pretty easily able to say, oh, my revenue is my rate times my hours, put my formula in for that, and now create my column called revenue. There's all different various other transformations I can do. I can aggregate the data in different ways. I can add any number of calculated columns. I can also just add what I'll call a KPI. Here we have a unique matters KPI, which is just over the whole data set, not necessarily a column that's in any one table. And then I have an average rate KPI. So Power Pivot, very much like your typical standard pivot tables that you've seen in the past, but again, connected to my data source. Just like any other Power Pivot, pivot table, I can pull in the different columns, I can add slicers, I can do different formulas, sums, averages, that kind of thing. And then the Power View really is much like a Power Pivot or pivot chart with a little bit better visual. So here I have a pie chart that is interactive. As I click on any one pie, all of the other charts that are connected will filter to just that one part of the pie. Each thing that rolls over gives you the details of revenue in this case for the office of main office. Again, I can filter from any one of the charts, or I can actually clear the filter and come back. So again, I'll call it prettier mechanism for displaying my charts. And some of these things you're going to see later come into play with the Power BI tools online. A Power Map, pretty much what you'd think, is a visual tool for displaying data that's geographically based. So in my Power Map, I am connecting to my same data model here, which is my Tallan law billing. And let's say I want to actually see my revenue, but by city. Based on the client city, I'm able to display my revenue. I can zoom in a little bit more. Again, just a geographical tool that allows me to sort of see how my different KPIs and measures are split up between different geographic regions. What I can do here now is take a video. So I can, start capturing my video and play at different levels, and I can actually show the different metrics that I want to show, and then sort of stop the video and store that and play it back later. So there's my Power Map. Power Query. Power Query really is sort of in addition to my standard way of capturing or pulling in my data. It allows me to connect to different types of data sources. I'll bring this guy up here. As you see, there's various different sources out there. You can use OData feeds. Obviously, you can use SQL Server on-prem. You can have SQL Server in the cloud. You can go to this Microsoft Azure Marketplace, which provides a bunch of free and pay subscription-based types of data that's out there. Hadoop, Hindsight, this list again is pretty big and growing every day. In addition, and actually these data sources, most of them are accessible via all these power tools. In addition to the different data sources, now within Power Query, it gives me a mechanism again to build that data model in a more user-friendly way. I can actually create queries ahead of time and post them out there. So I'll actually show you here. This is my data catalog queries. Post them out there in the excuse me, in the ether for others, or in my organization for others to use. So if it's a very complicated query that an IT person is required to build, or does a lot of different stuff that you'd want to do behind the scenes in the database, you can build that query ahead of time, post it out there, and others can use it without needing to understand the underlying technical details about how the query was put together. All right, so these are my Excel tools. And again, in and of themselves, yeah, here I can share this around. I can send my Excel file around to other people in the organization. But really, it's the additional Power BI tools that are going to empower you to use these in an even more collaborative way. So Power BI in the cloud. This is really made up of two things: your Power BI for Office 365, and the Power BI dashboard, which, as I mentioned earlier, is currently in a preview, and this little picture of it here on the side. What I'm going to do is go log into my Power BI. Okay, so as part of my Office 365 subscription, I have, I'll show you here, what will pop up if you have the Power BI is a little button. Okay, I can get to my Power BI from here. What this really is underlying is SharePoint Online, but with a twist. What it allows you to do is post your different Power Views and Excel spreadsheets that have Power View, Power Pivot, maps, all those things in them. Post them for not only, depending on the way it's set up, your organization or the public to see. So I've already posted and favorited this Tallan Law Azure SQL Premium Dashboard, which we'll click into in a bit. We have some World Bank indicators sample data and some Olympic sample data. So as I log in, my favorites, sort of this is my login page or my landing page, my favorites will show up. All right, and also I have an underlying, as I mentioned, SharePoint Online underlying, I have an underlying view into the actual document library. So here in the document library, there's a bunch of other folders, a bunch of other Excel files, but I've again featured or favorited two of them. If I click in, I'm now seeing a Excel Online version of my Power View. Well, shortly, here we go. Where I also have, where I can also do all the same things with the filters that I mentioned earlier. And they all are tied together. I can actually filter separately here by just one office if I want. Okay. And so now I've actually posted this Excel file onto SharePoint and allowed others access to it within my organization. So this is really what your Power BI, the initial offering of Power BI is a way, a place to post your Excel files and to actually share them with your organization. A couple other things I can do here. Come into my folder. I can actually schedule a data refresh. So I don't necessarily have to download this spreadsheet or open it and hit refresh to refresh the underlying data. Depending on how my connection is set up, if it's got the right security permissions and isn't trying to access a database that isn't generally available to your organization, and this one happens to have that little green check light, I'm able to set the connection. Because of my particular subscription, I have only daily, weekly, but some of the other Power BI, I think the Power BI second tier allows you can do hourly updates as well. But I can do weekly, daily, any days I want, starting and ending on a certain day, certain times, and send notifications. So if I save this, what will happen is I will get a notification every day or week that the file was refreshed, and that is available to anybody who now goes and brings up the spreadsheet. So rather than having, your standard SSRS reports, let's say, which have a schedule on them or subscription on them, you can post things here, and basically accomplish the same thing where it refreshes itself every day or every week, and all your users can go and take a look. One other thing to mention as I'll click back in here. I believe the only option there used to be for displaying these was Silverlight, and this is Silverlight, but as you know, that's really only available in IE. Now there is an option for HTML5, so this can basically any browser that supports HTML5, which most of them do these days, can display these Power Views. If I have a data source that's on-prem that I want to connect to one of these spreadsheets to, there's something called the Data Management Gateway, which I can have installed internally within my organization and set up basically a gateway so that each of these data sources can refresh themselves using the right security, without them having to be only on-prem. So it just kind of allows a secure mechanism to get back into your on-prem databases for these refreshes. Okay. Another very cool feature is called Q&A. So basically what I have here is a natural search, a Google if you will, of all of the files, the data that I posted here onto Power BI. So I'm going to ask a question. So I want revenue by work quarter. As I'm typing, you can see the various charts popping up in practice. So just by asking a question or just by natural language typing, I already have a chart here popping up that gives me the answer that I want. I can also sort of, based on the question that you ask or the word you're typing, it sort of guesses at the type of chart, and it does a pretty good job at it. But I can also change my chart. So if I wanted to do a pie chart instead, or I wanted my 100% chart, I wanted my chart to turn, to be more of a column versus a bar. What I can then do, got some options here. I can actually say this wasn't a very helpful question, or the result not being very helpful. I can actually show featured questions that others have featured. I can feature this question that I just put in. I can share a link so that others can just basically run the exact same question or execute the same question and get the same answer. And I can, copy the URL. So a very cool feature that without having to create charts ahead of time or, provide this information to a user, they can ask the questions and get answers right away in a very visual format. All right, I am going to go over here one last thing. So I can also take one of these Power Views and I can embed it into any web page I want. So I'm going to go over to our blog where I've posted a blog and some of the details of how to do that. But what I will show you is that in our Tallan blog, it's going to go up here in a second. I'll bring up the larger view anyway. In our Tallan blog, I have utilizing an iframe and what's called a guest link that I've set up ahead of time here. I've provided a means to embed this actual Power View right into my web page. So this can be done in any blog, any web page, anywhere that you want to embed your data. Again, same features, functions, just like any of the other Power Views. And the way I've done that again is using my Power BI setup here, posting things to my Power BI SharePoint online, and then providing a guest link. So you obviously would want to make sure that you're not posting any data you wouldn't want the world to see. But if that's data that, if that's available or it's not a problem to do that, then the means to do is very easy. They now have introduced something called Power BI dashboards. And actually, anytime you log into your Power BI account, you'll see up here in the top right, try it. I've already tried it. So when I go there, it's going to bring me in. Okay, so with Power BI, I always have to use Excel. But what the dashboard is there for is to take the Excel part out if I want to. So I can actually get data from a number of different data sources. One of them is Excel, so I can upload or connect to an Excel workbook just like I did in the Power BI world. I can do a Power BI Designer file, which I'll talk to you about in a little bit. It's, again, a desktop tool that allows you to design your pivot charts, your Power Views, basically, outside of Excel, but in the same fashion. I can connect to an analysis services cube, as long as that analysis service cube is tabular to start off with. I think at some point they'll support for other, for the different types of cubes, but for now it's tabular. GitHub, if I have this data, mark it up, I can connect to Microsoft Dynamics. These things, this list keeps growing as well every day. I can't currently connect to just any old SQL Server and write a query. But anything I do in Excel through my Power Views, can provide that same mechanism. Again, I can, much like the data management gateway, I can actually connect or provide a connection into my on-prem queues, SQL Server Analysis Services cubes, through really there's a connector that uses the data management gateway to do just that. Okay, so I've actually already created a dashboard. So what I have here is the Tallan Law dashboard, in which I have these little widgets with various pieces of information that came from my sources. So one of my sources, I'll bring it up here, very similar to what you've been seeing throughout, is my Tallan Law Excel spreadsheet with various charts in it. So as you look at any one of your reports, you'll end up seeing this. You'll see this pinned to my dashboard. And if I go back to my dashboard, it pinned again. I have it twice here because I already had it, but it pinned the actual particular widget. So what this allows me to do is I can create one dashboard. I can go to various reports and take the most important information, or at least what I would see as the most important information, and pin it to the dashboard. There we go. Also within here, you can actually set up various pages within my report, so much like the sheets in Excel, so that I can actually have a separation of the different types of widgets. I'm just going to create one real quick here. My revenue. Right. There's a few different types of charts that are not available in Excel, one of which is what's called a combo chart stacked, so that I can combine a bar chart along with a line chart. There's something called a card, which I think you saw with those big numbers that kept popping up, so I'll bring revenue here. I'll set it to be a card. It doesn't look all that fancy inside here, but if I now pin this to my dashboard, these big numbers here that just show you that one larger or overall global metric are based on these cards. So again, there's some various newer types of charts and options available within the dashboard that aren't necessarily available in Excel. Bring up the Power BI Designer. I talked about this a little earlier. Much like the features inside Excel, I'm able to, using this desktop tool, without the need for Excel 2010 or 2013, run this desktop tool, connect to all of my various data sources, create all the same types of charts. So again, just the mechanism for creating my Power Views without needing Excel. All right, you have some various apps. So I've got an iPhone and an iPad app. I don't have an iPhone or iPad, so I just took a couple screenshots. So here's an iPhone version, which really, when you connect in, it gives you that same view as the new dashboard. So I can see any dashboard that I have created out there. I can see all of the various charts that are within. I can create favorites. In the iPhone app, there's something called alerts, which allows you to set an alert when any one metric or measure goes above or below a certain value. The iPad app, very similar, and although for some reason the iPad app doesn't have the alerts, but same idea. And there's also a Windows app, which is called Power BI, which allows you to connect into your Power BI website. So, as you see, there's a ton of different tools out there for utilizing Power BI, and really putting the power into the end user's hands.